Welcome to the Grow As We Go podcast. I am Sam, breathwork coach and self-growth junkie. Here we create space for natural, vulnerable, and deeply connected conversations on life as it happens, wisdom that I've picked up along the way, and tools to truly enjoy this beautiful life you've been given. I want to appreciate you for being here, whether this is your first time or you've been here since the beginning. We love feedback here, so leave your thoughts and takeaways from this episode in the reviews section of this podcast. This also helps the podcast become a bit more relevant in search reviews. Another way you can support this podcast is by following me on Instagram at Samantha__Charles and take a screenshot of this episode to share it on your social media and share your takeaways so that your junkie friends can come and get their fix too. Hello, and welcome to another episode. So I'm popping on here without a structure or really idea of where I'm going other than the simple idea I was given. So I practice sacred medicine called hape, and I was introduced to hape last year, October of 2021. Oh no, it was 2022. It's 23 right now. So I was introduced to hape doing a ceremony with wachuma, which is another sacred plant medicine. It was my first time really experiencing plant medicine. And so we did wachuma, which was a really wonderful experience. Talk about that at another time, but was introduced to hape, and hape has been a really interesting medicine practice and tool that I've had a relationship with ever since. So hape is a sacred tobacco, and it's not what you typically think of. Tobacco's bad and causes cancer, smoking and whatnot. And I think that's like a huge misconception. Part of what's wrong with the way that we deal with these medicines. They often get abused. I feel like a lot of these plant medicines get taken by Western culture and taken into like a means of escape in a way. Like if you think about mushrooms and other different forms of sacred medicine, there was a so this is going to be, I'm just talking here. It's just me, and this might be like a spider web of a conversation, but it's the way that I process. And so I appreciate you being here and being patient. And I know that it will all wrap up in a really beautiful way. So I just get to trust that. So I watched this documentary on Netflix. It's called How to Change Your Mind. And it's like a 4-part series. I believe it was a book before, but there's 4-part episodes. They go into different medicines and the way that they have been used historically, how they're introduced, potentially abused, and then outlawed. They talk about LSD, mushrooms like psilocybin, MDMA, and then mescaline, which is like more commonly known as peyote. And so they dive into it, and it was a really fascinating conversation and experiment and like learning basically on the ways in which these medicines and like plant medicines basically is what they are, started from really sacred experience and led to a lot of transformational experiences with people, were then later abused and, like I said, outlawed. And in ways that they're finding their way back into practice in a healing and somewhat controlled environment these days. And so I had watched that episode, and that was really interesting and eye-opening around the time that I was experimenting with various plant medicines last year. And so I'm hopping on after having participated in a hape experience, after that wachuma, sitting with some maestros and people that I love, After that experience, I purchased a few tools for being able to practice hape on my own at home. So I'll leave some information in the show notes about some of this stuff that I'm talking about. So that way, if you, it makes sense for you to dive into that, feel free. So I'll share that Netflix episode there. And then also where I get my hape, I order it online through a website called Four Visions. And they have a lot of information there if you want to learn more about it. I'd love to do an episode eventually with somebody else who has more wisdom and experience around that. I think that'd be really supportive for me to learn. And if you're interested, you can catch that one. So hape, my understanding of hape is it's a sacred tobacco snuff. And so what I was talking about earlier and why I brought up the how to change your mind is there are things in which Western culture has taken over and abused in a sense. So we took tobacco and turned it into cigarettes, which, don't only contain tobacco. It contains a lot of other things that are really harmful. I know at some point they had done some testing around there being like rat poison and just all this like artificial chemicals and stuff that's not helpful for our bodies. And at the same time, a lot of the sacred use and medicinal use found in tobacco is not in the form of inhaling it into your lungs. And so the sacred tobacco snuff of hape it's ground into a really, really fine powder, and they use a lot of other medicinal herbs and such found locally. And each hape has its own intention and purpose and use, and things that it can bring alive within you. And so you take this sacred tobacco snuff, and it's like a powder form. You put it in your hand, and you apply it into a tool. So there's two different tools. Like one's a curepe and a tepe, and I believe I'm saying that right. But there's these two different tools, and one is meant for you to use it on yourself. So the way that it's shaped is like a V, and so you can blow it up into your nose easily. And then the other one is for you to administer it to somebody else in a sacred setting. So it's more of like kind of like an L shape. So you put the tobacco on one end, you do a sacred prayer and ceremony and blow it into the nose of somebody else receiving. And so I've sat in various settings where doing it with others in sacred circle, doing it on my own in sacred circle. And so I've just sat with it, and I had some things come to me that I'm wanting to share here with you. So first I'll talk a bit about what my experience with hape has been. Ever since I started in October and I purchased some things a few months later to do it on my own, I had a really interesting experience. So during Wachuma, I'm not a visual person, but I very clearly saw a visual of like a little girl. And I'm not quite clear on what it all meant, but it was all a really, really beautiful experience. Again, with hape, it's uncomfortable. The tobacco being blown up into your nose, and again, you're not inhaling it, so it's not like a snorting effect. You actually exhale as the tobacco is being blown in. So you're not ingesting it. It goes up into your sinus cavities. And again, I don't want to speak and say things that are not true about it, so I'm going to leave it at that with my experience. But for me, it produces a really calm and peaceful and meditative state for maybe 15 minutes. Sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes a little shorter. It kind of depends on the strength of the hape that you're using. And also in my experience, it largely is affected by your internal state and where you are, and the messages that you get to hear and that are important for you. So after my Wachuma experience and I purchased all the things, I was going through a time in my life where there was a lot of confusion and a lot of internal conflict back and forth, lack of self-trust, and just a lot of stuff coming up around me and my relationship and what I was doing in life, really. And during that time, any time that I would do hape and ceremony with myself or in others, my internal experience was very dizzy. I would experience dizziness, nausea, and at a point or two, it was like I would vomit. And whenever you're practicing these sacred medicines and healing, they call that getting well. And I find that perspective really interesting because it's like getting well. You're releasing things that no longer serve you, whether it's ideas, energies, or, you know, maybe what you've ingested. Like you think about what you ingested, like as if we're eating and drinking and stuff that we're putting into our bodies. But there's also an aspect of it is like, what kind of energy are you allowing into your life? What conversations are you having and putting yourself in experience with others and with yourself? So that was my experience for some time. And then a really big shift occurred, and I was no longer feeling confused and feeling conflicted internally. And ever since that, and some decisions I made and ways that I stood up for myself that I hadn't been in the past, that was when I noticed a shift in my experience of hape. And so it's really fascinating to notice like how I was showing up and what my experience was. So I've gone back and forth between having like a daily practice, having a every now and then practice. I am mindful of the like addictive nature of tobacco, at least in the world of Western medicine, and the addiction present with tobacco and smoking. And it's I've had a lot of family history with people smoking and trying to stop smoking, and that just being really challenging for them, as well as a history of addiction and that just being really prevalent in my family. And so I approach this medicine with a mindfulness with that in mind, basically. So I felt called for maybe a month or two to do it daily, and then I felt called to take a break. And so it was just this thing that, you know, I would practice when it made sense, basically, choosing to trust myself and go from there. So it's been a while. I've not been practicing like regularly with hape for some months now, but here and there whenever I'm feeling called. And so I felt called today, and yeah. So my experience just now of hape was a lot of what I get is like to trust myself. And that's been a really huge area of growth for me in the last year. And so what I received was a message of trusting myself and to get out of my own way, showing up powerfully and making shifts around that, knowing that I'm worthy of love and attention and more than just the bare minimum, and stepping into my own power and taking up space and asking for things that I maybe am scared to ask of. I think about, in particular, asking for a raise. I'm planning on doing that, and so excited for that. But just different things that stop me, these conversations in my head that stop me from like living fully and taking risks. So there was some about that. And another thing is I've been working on my posture. I am 5'10" and have been probably since I was like 12. And growing up, I never liked my height. And so I would slouch or stand different ways. And so that led to that, and an accident led to me having like chronic back pain as a adolescent and into my adulthood. So I've been working a lot on my posture in the last year. And it's been a really interesting road because like standing up straight and using my back causes me to have back pain. And so anyway, it's just been a really interesting journey for me. And through that, I've had a couple of hape experiences where it's like lead with the heart, and like whenever I make that adjustment where I'm pushing forward with my heart. And another thing that comes up around that is being a woman and having breasts, and basically not refusing, but just, I don't like to wear bras. And so whenever that's happening and I'm pushing my heart forward, I'm also pushing my chest forward, and there comes shame and all this programming around like my nipples showing or my breast sticking out and like wanting to hide that. And so I would concave as well. And so with this recent practice just now, it was like lead from the heart, and I was like, oh my gosh, thank you, I forgot, like, thank you. And I was thinking like, thank you universe, thank you mother. And then something came to me around Mother Earth and Father Sky. And I was just speaking with my mom earlier today about like feminine and masculine energy, and learning a lot about that, and finding that world of energies and polarities and opposites really fascinating. And the way that I show up and where I settle more into my feminine. And then there being also this balance of like, okay, but I also get to pull into my masculine in different areas. And because they're, whenever you have too much of one, you're out of balance. And balance doesn't necessarily mean equality. And that's been a really interesting realization and teaching for me, especially growing up in this world and the culture and society, a time in it where I grew up in the era where it's like, anything you can do, I can do better, and female empowerment and women empowerment. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And I also can see in ways that was damaging, because there's this sense of equality. And, that word is interesting because sure, there's a lot of inequalities, and there's, we live in this patriarchal society where it's like men rule, and being a woman and being a girl is seen as weak. And a lot of the healing that I'm doing now and providing in the world is around that reclamation of our femininity, of our divine feminine, of womanhood and sisterhood. And so it's all very exciting to me, because I think about ways that I have been taught that and programmed in a sense, right? Like you think about, oh, you hit like a girl, or, oh, you're such a pussy. And like both of those things are designed to be like hurtful and an insult, as if being a girl and having a pussy is weak. And thus, because we're in this patriarchal world, being weak and not being strong is a downfall and like a poor quality to have as a human. And basically it's like saying that being a woman is not so great. And I've really done a lot of healing in that world of like, women are amazing. Women are mothers, and there is so much strength in women and in femininity, and it's not physical strength. It's not the pushing and the brute force kind of strength. It's a much different kind of strength. And so when I think about that, I think about elements, and there's a lot here that all like is working together to make this like beautiful like watercolor overlaid with constellations and stars, and just like these, so much working here. And it's like a huge spider web, and it all makes this really, really beautiful picture in which we can all interact and engage in one another. And so a big piece of my healing and my like revelation around being a woman and around that growing up, and anything you can do, I can do better, and equality and fighting for that, and feminist movements and whatnot, is that, we, men and women, are not the same. Men and women are not equals. And how beautiful is that we have like divine masculine energy and divine feminine energy both held within us, and at the same time people, whether it's men or women, fall into where you rest more naturally and fall more naturally into one energy over the other, typically. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, it's male, female, it's just an energy. And there are a lot of ways in which women have been conditioned to show up with masculine energy when maybe that's not where they would naturally like to be. And being in this patriarchal, very doing and producing, active, thinking, logical, be reasonable, be rational, and very task-oriented and goal-oriented, competition and talking and using your brain and intellect and your mind. So those are all very masculine energies. And there's a way in which in this culture that is rewarded and seen as success. When there's the other side, the more feminine aspect of just being instead of doing, receiving and feeling and being more emotional. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole that this could go down of, women being seen as weak and irrational and untrustworthy because we're more in tune with our emotions. And there's a lot of cultural things that go within all of this where, big boys don't cry. And so men don't even have access to that and get shut down from their feminine. And yeah, there's a lot of different ways this whole conversation could go. But growing up in that world and still witnessing it as well, right? It's not totally shifted. But the feminine is more relationship oriented rather than task. There's a creativity and cooperation and listening. And with that listening, it's intuition instead of intellect. And more in a subtleness, right? There's strength in the subtlety. And there gets to be a balance of these energies within us. And so back to the hape experience of Mother Earth and Father Sky. I found that really interesting because when I think about feminine energy and the mother, it's not earth energy. And yet we speak of Mother Earth as she is grounded and she nurtures and provides. And then whenever I think of masculine energy and Father Sky, it's the balance of things. There's masculine energy of thinking and logical and being structured and disciplined and a strength. And when I think of sky energy or air energy, Father Sky, air energy to me is very whimsical and less concrete and kind of all over the place. It's where ideas and creativity and intuition comes in my understanding of, we have elements and we have energies. And it's just really fascinating that there's that understanding of Mother Earth and Father Sky. And quite frankly, those seem to be opposite of my understanding of what masculine and father energy is and what feminine and mother energy is. And so I say all that because I think that it's proof there that there gets to be balance in all things. And I'm speaking about the elements, to talk also about water and fire energy. And so to me, I think about water and air energies being more feminine in a way, and then fire and earth being more masculine energies. And we can break that down to fire and air. So fire energy, to me, my understanding of it is there being productivity and getting things done and moving with you think about, it's so fascinating to me, all these sayings, right? So we've got Mother Earth, Father Sky, and then these sayings that we say without really thinking much behind it. It's it really lit a fire under me. It's to start getting things done, to be productive, to do, to think, to analyze, and be very task oriented in completing a goal. And then we think about earth energy, and it's like, oh yes, like they're very down to earth. That person's very down to earth. And what does that mean? It's a sense of solidity, I guess, if that's a word, of solidness and structure and being somebody you can count on and reliability. And so that's what I think of when I think about earth energies. And then air and water, to me, feel more feminine, because there's the air, which is, like I was speaking earlier with Father Sky, of the air is everywhere. Air is creative, and where thoughts are, like it's the realm of thoughts and energy to me. And that's where creativity and feeling, like you think about love. Love is not something that you can hold on to. Ideas are not something you can hold on to. They're in the air, and they're sometimes slippery and sometimes come to you out of nowhere, and things like that. And you think about the sayings with air, it's like, oh, like an airhead, right? Like they're not down to earth. They're kind of in the thoughts and the clouds, like just all over the place. And then with water, there's this way that water is used to represent relationships and going with the flow. You think about that saying, oh, I'm just going with the flow. And like, what does that mean? It's like going here and there and being flexible and, being flexible and feeling and being relationship oriented. There's a beingness to air and to water for me. Like it's just being, it's just flowing. It's just there. And emotions as well. Like you get this flood of emotions and this wave of emotions. So there's all these like water verbiage that we use whenever we're talking about feelings and emotions. And while we're talking about energies, if you think about the yin yang, and so yin energy is associated with feminine, and yang energy is associated with masculine. And you think about, the yin yang drawing or artwork where it's like the circle with half of an S down it, and there's black and white. And within the black, there is white. And within the white, there is black. And so I think about that when I think about like balance. And then within that, there is a whole. And so it's really fascinating to think about masculine energy, feminine energy, and how can you pull on those different energies to create the results and to create the life and the sense of being that, serves you best. So think about that. And again, going back to the whole conversation around feminism and equality, and I just find that conversation really fascinating in the realms of, energy and what that looks like. And so going back to how men and women are not equal, we are built differently. I believe that we have different instincts in us as well. And all of that revolves around like our roles in nature. And, the mother takes care of the young and the father provides, typically is like a stereotypical setup of things. And even in the animal kingdom, if you think about things in that way as well. And so equal means the same, and we are not the same. And what a beautiful thing that is. That doesn't mean that women are not strong and capable, because I have seen women be incredibly strong and incredibly capable. Childbirth is a trip, and it's a really wonderful experience. I have 2 young boys that I was able to have them at home. And if that is not a perfect representation of the strength of a woman, I don't know what is. Our ability to tolerate, our pain tolerance is ridiculous. And I could go down a hole with that, but based on things that we allow and tolerate, basically. And so, no, it doesn't mean that women are not strong or not capable of doing, of being logical and task oriented and all like that, but it's just a different energy. And I think that life becomes a lot easier when we're not trying to do it all. Like to do everything, to be perfect at everything, of course you want to be whole to where you can do things on your own. And is it a gift to be able to lean on others who have gifts and ask others to use our gifts and be asked to support with our gifts and our zone of genius and our natural capabilities, and also to ask others for support in theirs. And when I think about this, just as an example in the realm of men and women, men typically, like again, I'm speaking in typical terms, right? Men tend to be more physically strong because of the way that they're built, and it's just a fact. And it's not to say that there are not women who are stronger than men. Of course there are, like physically stronger, and the same can be said for the reverse. But typically speaking, men tend to be more physically strong, especially in the upper body area. And so is it weak for me just because I can lift these boxes up and put them up high, or do moving different things around the house or in my life? Sure, I can. Is it easier for my partner or my brother or my dad to do these things if I ask? Yes, 100%. It's easier for them. And so I don't say that to like relinquish people of responsibility and of like being a damsel in distress and like learned helplessness. Not at all. It's just about like leaning into each other's gifts. And the same could be said for like relationships, and women tend to have that skill of maintaining relationships and that being really important. And does that mean that men don't get to learn how to do that, to be whole and capable and cooperative? No, absolutely not. But there's a way in which we can lean on each other for our strengths so that we can also learn how to be whole from somebody who has that capability a bit more naturally, if that makes sense. And so I'll bring this full circle around my own personal journey in embodying and like repairing my relationship to femininity and womanhood and sisterhood, and just embracing feminine energy in a way that's been really supportive and healing. Not like shifting my viewpoint of seeing the feminine qualities as weak, seeing them like just as they are. They just like the isness of life. And I love that realm of thinking, the isness. It just is. Like not better, not worse. It just is. They get to be different, and we don't need to compare because there's no use in doing that. The only thing that comparisons result in is a disconnection and a lack of honoring the differences. And if you think about masculine energy, one of the qualities is competition versus cooperation. And there's a way growing up in the patriarchy that there's this competition, right? Of like anything you can do, I can do better. Like even that in itself is masculine and competitive, and it's not useful. There are times in which competition could be useful, like a healthy competition and a healthy whatnot, but oftentimes I've experienced it coming from a woundedness. But learning to appreciate and embody my femininity and different feminine qualities, and there's a lot of work that I'm currently doing and producing into the world around that. Last week I did a yoni casting sister circle gathering, and it was incredibly healing for like body image and like sisterhood wounds, and just I plan on doing an episode about that. and like doing yoni castings and dancing more for myself, and learning that my flow and my desire to go with the flow is not a bad thing, and learning about emotions and just how learning how I as a woman am different than a man and different than a lot of the way that the world is set up in patriarchy. And another thing that comes to mind is the cyclical nature of a woman compared to the linear nature of a man. Another thing that I find interesting is feminine and the moon. And you think about the moon has phases and cycles, and so do women. And oftentimes if you track your cycle, there are ways in which we naturally, if you're not using, birth control or artificial hormones and all kinds of different stuff that can mess with this, but oftentimes women will bleed with the full moon or with the new moon, and there's different things about that's fascinating that I've gone down rabbit holes of. But there is this cyclical nature to women, and so we are not, constant and predictable and in that way. And so the emotions are different and the needs are different. And so it's more of a flow situation. Our daily hormones are different. It goes in a cycle of a month instead of day to day. And a lot of the way things are set up in this world is, the productivity, the work day cycle, the workout schedule that's recommended to like wake up early and do it in the morning. And just all these, ways to succeed are set up based on masculine energy and the way that the linear and predictability that comes with like the sun. And that's why the sun is considered masculine. It rises and it sets every day, very predictable. Same goes with men and their hormone levels. They have a very daily, like day to day, it's basically the same, their hormone levels. And I'm not super familiar, so don't catch me lying here, but there's like a rise in testosterone at a certain point of the day, and then it starts to fall. And that happens every day. And so there is this like linear sort of sun daily routine that they have. So learning more about the ways in which women and myself as a woman is different than kind of the way that I've been brought up, and learning how women are different and learning different things that I didn't learn in school and that I didn't get growing up. Truly an honoring of the female body and the female mind and the way that it is different has been incredibly supportive for me. Learning about these energies and the way that they interact. And yeah, there's just been a lot of healing around that I definitely want to go into more detail of, and ways that could support you if that's something you're interested in. Yeah. So I'm feeling complete around this podcast and the episode. I love the direction that it went in, and didn't really know what we were doing when I started. So how fun is that? Just to trust and to be divinely guided to share this information with you all. I hope it was useful. I would love if you share any of your takeaways with me in the comment section, or find me on Instagram at Samantha__Charles. Could also, if you found this episode incredibly useful, you could screenshot it and share on your social media to get the word out. Tag friends who you think may be interested, and find this information supportive. So yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you for joining today, and catch you next time.